Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas to you all out there. And certainly we have a lot of weather to talk about. We have a lot of moisture, milder air working its way up through the interior, and this is going to create heavy snow and freezing rain. So we have a Christmas holiday winter storm that's going to impact areas especially from the southwest part of the state, but especially along and north of the Alaska Range, through the central interior, up through the south side of the Brooks Range. Heaviest snow is going to fall in the vicinity of Fairbanks. You can see up to a foot of snow. Then on top of that, get a quarter to maybe as much as a half inch of freezing rain. There'll be some heavier freezing rain potential just south of Fairbanks as you get toward Nenana and Haisley. So definitely any travel on the interior highways this holiday weekend is going to be quite hazardous. You want to make sure you bring along your winter survival kit stuff, so in case you get stuck or have any issues, at least you're going to be all right. So the areas that are going to be impacted, I just mentioned, also south central areas, including the Anchorage Bowl come Sunday into Sunday night. There could be a period of freezing rain, and perhaps as much as a quarter to nearly a third of an inch of freezing rain would cause a lot of problems since the heavier population and the holiday weekend there in the vicinity of Anchorage, as well as down toward Girdwood and heading out toward Whittier and Seward. And it's looking like a rather breezy and cold holiday weekend for the Panhandle, but things there should be mainly dry. And we're going to still have another surge or so of milder air come across the southwest, south central areas of the state here after this system just before the new year, but it is looking like potentially more widespread cold could return to the much of the mainland here immediately after the new year, around the 2nd or 3rd of January. So here's a look at the southwest coast. Kipnuk has had temperatures around freezing this afternoon, visibility reduced and some fog. And that mild air temperatures there are going to be holding, if not anything, rising above freezing as we go through tonight and Christmas Day. Tanana has only been sitting at 17 degrees below zero, but the warmer air is coming with the pending winter storm. There's going to be heavy snow first, and then mixing with some freezing rain as we get into Christmas Day night and Sunday morning. And we're looking at widespread winter storm warnings covering from the Alcan along the south side of the Brooks Range up through the Alaska Range, extending westward through Bettles, Ambler, Kotzebue, and then off to the southwest. The yellow areas indicate advisories for push of moisture coming in tonight and through the first part of Christmas Day. There could be some freezing rain. And as we look at south central areas, a winter storm watch for Anchorage Bowl, as well as areas east and southeastward, including Seward and Whittier, for the potential for at least a quarter of an inch or maybe upwards to a third of an inch of freezing rain Sunday into Sunday night, early Monday. There is also a wind chill advisory for White Pass in the north end there of the Panhandle. As I mentioned, the Panhandle is going to have a cold and quiet but somewhat breezy weekend here, holiday weekend. And looking at the satellite imagery, we can see the deeper, the more extensive, higher cloud tops that are pushing in through the southwest side of the state, extending out into the central Bering. That is that surge of moisture that's going to work its way east northeastward up along the Yukon River between the Alaska Range and the Brooks Range, and that's going to be the focus where that cold air is in place initially. A burst of some moderate to heavy snow, and then as warmer air arrives Saturday night into Sunday, you can see that mix with or change over to freezing rain. So here comes the warm front for this afternoon, and then tonight that front pushes up into the southwest interior and then just kind of stalls out, and that's going to feed that moisture up into the central and east central interior, climbing up through the middle and upper Yukon Valley, and that's why places like Fairbanks could get a foot of snow. And looking back off toward the west there, the southwest coast will actually get warm enough temperatures above freezing where we just anticipate rain falling there. McCormick on down toward Dillingham, King Salmon for Christmas Day. But as you get up into the further northeastward into the interior, you'll see freezing rain and then some heavier snow, especially as you get up around Fairbanks. And then as we go into Sunday, that frontal system just kind of stalls out and lays across the center part of the state back out in the Bering, waiting for the next surge of milder air to ride up eastward along that as we get past the Christmas holiday. So temperatures chilly, single digits there for the inner channels with freezing spray as the breeze holds up. Could be 20 below at Glen Allen and single digits, including Talkeetna and Anchorage. Saturday afternoon, it stays chilly throughout south central areas, especially Matsu Valley and into the Copper River Basin. And notice the temperatures, how chilly they are across the panhandle, but then warming up above freezing as you get along and west of the Alaska Range. And for Sunday morning lows, it could be below zero there at Haines and Skagway. Temperatures will begin to come up, setting that potential for the freezing rain as that moisture arrives in through the Anchorage Bowl. And look, Sunday afternoon, you can see temperatures around or just a tad above 40 there as you get along and west of the Alaska Range. Very cold still Saturday morning, 35 belowish, Arctic Village, Fort Yukon. And then as we go into Saturday afternoon, notice the warmer temperatures creeping up along the Yukon River Valley, 36 there, Eminat. And still the only 8 above at Fairbanks under the snow. And Sunday morning, lows stay below zero toward along the Alcan and the Arctic's shore there. But as we get out toward the west, temperatures have risen. We could see some readings up around 40 or so, creeping up into the central Yukon Valley by Sunday. And looking at the southwest, Saturday morning, temperatures are going to be steady to slowly rising along the southwest coast and creeping up along the lower portion of the Yukon and Kuskokwim River basins. And then Saturday afternoon, we're going to see temperatures rising above freezing there through creeping into the southwest interior to places like Bethel and Aniak, and look at maybe even 50 again at Dutch Harbor. And then for Sunday morning, temperatures do not fall below freezing across portions of the southwest interior along the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. And temperatures Sunday afternoon will likely be up around or maybe even a little above 40 degrees all the way up there as you're creeping up along the Yukon and Kuskokwim river basins, especially along and west of the Alaska Range. And then temperatures definitely in the 40s extending out the length of the Alaska Peninsula. And Dutch Harbor once again could be up around 50 degrees come Sunday afternoon. Looking at the extended forecast, 6 to 10 day temperature outlook December 30th through January 3rd. Temperatures are expected to average below normal in all but the southwest part of the state, though there are some indications that behind the next system after this one, it could turn sharply colder across much of the mainland right after the new year. That's not a definite yet, but that's a trend I'll be keeping an eye on. And then as we look at precipitation potential, we'll continue to see that stream of moisture working its way in off of the Bering and working its way east-northeastward up along the Yukon River between the Alaska Range and the Brooks Range. So there could be, again, enhanced precipitation falling across the central mainland as we go through the end of this year into the early new year.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time now for aviation weather, and if you do have a flight planned or thinking about it for Christmas Day and over the holiday weekend, it's going to be tough. We're going to have widespread IFR conditions across much of the state, thanks to a surge of warmer, moist air. When that overrides colder air at the surface, it produces snow, lower ceilings, lower visibilities, and then even some mixed precipitation on the back edge of the heavier precipitation areas that are coming in through the southwest portion, the interior of the state. So widespread IFR conditions are anticipated Saturday morning from the Alaska Range up through the center there of the Yukon River Basin, westward through the southwest Seward Peninsula, as much of the Bering, Alaska Peninsula, and the Aleutians. Look for that area expanding northeastward across the mainland on Saturday afternoon. And as we get into Sunday, we'll see widespread IFR conditions Sunday morning from along the Gulf, I should say the areas of the Arctic coast extending through much of the mainland all the way to the Alcan border. and then extending back toward the west and southwest out through much of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and then widespread IFR conditions from the Arctic coast southward to the Gulf Coast, including the Kenai Peninsula as well as Kodiak Island. So past conditions Saturday, Anaktuvuk may briefly be VFR early but become MVFR, with IFR conditions coming up there through areas south of the south entrance. For Adigan Pass, look for VFR conditions early in the day becoming MVFR, but again, those areas will become IFR by Saturday evening and night. Further south and west, widespread IFR conditions along and west of Lake Clark and Merrill Passes, with some MVFR conditions early Christmas Day at over Cook Inlet. And then for the areas rounding the central Alaska Range, rainy as well as windy passes will be IFR throughout Christmas Day. Further east, Isabel will become IFR after starting MVFR in the early morning. And Mentasta will start out VFR but become IFR later Christmas Day. Tanita, as well as Portage Passes, will be IFR throughout Christmas Day, whereas in the northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see VFR conditions, though chilly temperatures thanks to high pressure centered over the southern Yukon with that offshore flow. Well, looking at the freezing levels, there is a bulge there reflecting that warmer ridge of high pressure in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. So we have freezing levels upwards to 8,000 feet along the southwest coast. Bristol Bay briefly coming upwards to 10,000 feet there, the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. And whenever we get that warmer air overriding the colder air of the surface, especially there through the central interior, that means areas of moderate to heavier snow, and on between best chance of icing there between 1,000 and 12,000 feet. On the back edge of the heavier precipitation, it's warm enough that it mixes with freezing rain and sleet or changes over to plain rain, with freezing levels there creeping up into the southwest between 8,000 and a flight level of 18,000 feet. And then another area of considerable moderate icing possible there through the west central Aleutians between 6,000 and 16,000 feet. Now you can see that large ridge of high pressure in the upper atmosphere, 30,000 feet. Strongest jet core winds are diving out of the northwest there across the lower Panhandle, Haida Gwaii, upwards to 155 knots. And then on the other side, 165 knot winds coming up there through eastern Russia. And as we drop down to 9,000 feet, still seeing that ridge coming up through the west side of the state. And we have winds across the mainland, generally 40 to 50 knots, but stronger winds out over the lower Bering down into the central Aleutians, upwards to 80 knots from the southwest. And finally, bringing it down to 3,000 feet, weak low pressure circulation, northern Gulf, another one up there in the Chukchi Sea along the Russian coast. But the most notable winds there through the central Aleutians, anywhere from 50 to just upwards to 75 knots south of the central Aleutians, and that's where the turbulence will be. Isolated severe turbulence possible there across the central Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet on Christmas Day. And that turbulence, considerable moderate turbulence, extending northeastward up along the Alaska Peninsula into the southwest interior, as well as encompassing the Seward Peninsula. And the best chance there of some considerable moderate turbulence will be between surface and 4,000 feet. So there is your flying weather. It's rather doubtful, though, with the IFR conditions, you'll be able to get off the ground here on Christmas Day. But if you do manage, have a safe flight.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called AKwx, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that AKwx is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AKwx is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades. They're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 or 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations. And you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad, and this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch, and I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side, and I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding, and rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRa's. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoras.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRa's. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and starting out with the sea ice edge today. Of note, we've had temperatures rise to around and even above freezing along the southwest coast in response to a warm front lifting its way east-northeastward into the southwest interior. There have been some stronger winds, so that ice is going to shift around with southerly winds becoming more southwesterly. We're going to have another system too as we get past the Christmas holiday that'll bring another push of milder air up, especially through the southwest portion of the state. So look for this ice to continue to shift and retreat northward a bit at times, as well as also have a tendency to develop breaks and things, so be careful if you do venture out on the ice. Otherwise, Saturday for the Panhandle, high pressure centered north of there up through the lower Yukon and northwest Canada into British Columbia is providing colder offshore flow. We have north winds down there through the inner channels, gusting as high as 40 knots there, Lynn Canal. Also will be some freezing spray with waves running around 5 feet or so in the northern canals, and offshore flow out of the northeast and east out there along the Gulf Coast with waves of 6 to 8 feet. On Sunday, not a whole lot of change weather-wise, generally dry but cold temperatures. Winds come down a little bit there and through the inner channels out of the northeast, 15 to 25 knots, some higher gusts to 35 knots possible there in Lynn Canal. Waves 3 to 4 feet, and then along the outer Gulf Coast, winds easterly 10 to 15 knots, waves 4 to 6 feet. For south central areas, winds will be northeasterly across Prince William Sound in the ice-covered area of Cook Inlet at about 10 knots. But as we get down toward more variable winds, they're even kind of easterly southeast of the Kenai and coming offshore of the Kenai Peninsula and through the mouth of Cook Inlet with waves only a few feet. For Sunday, winds, though, will start to turn around. Once you get along and west of the Alaska Range, winds will be more west-southwesterly, and they'll pick up to 30 knots there, the lower portion of Cook Inlet, with waves of 7 to 9 feet. That milder air is also going to enhance the possibility of some freezing rain in the Anchorage Bowl, as well as you go down along Turnagain Arm toward Seward and Whittier. Otherwise, throughout the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, winds will generally be out of the southwest, 20 to 25 knots on Saturday. Waves 8 feet on the Pacific Gulf side and 4 to 7 feet on the Bering side. Sunday, winds will increase a bit more from the southwest at 30 to 35 knots. Waves as high as 11 feet Shelikof Strait, 10 to 13 feet on the North Pacific side, and as much as 10 feet there north of Cold Bay on the Bering side. Across the Aleutian chain, winds will generally be out of the south at 30 to 35 knots, especially the eastern half of the Aleutians, with waves anywhere from about 12 to 18 feet on the North Pacific side and 8 to 12 feet on the Bering side. And then look for winds on Sunday to generally be from the south, as high as 35 to 40 knots across the eastern Aleutians, and 30 to 35 knots from the south western Aleutians, and waves anywhere from about 18 to 22 feet on the North Pacific side, and in the leeward shelter of the islands, waves generally about 10 to 15 feet. Across the west coast, ice is in place. It'll shift around, winds being out of the southwest at about 20 knots. Not especially strong. Southerly there, though, at St. Paul and St. George with 10-foot waves, but then stronger winds move in on Sunday. And as a result, we'll see winds from the south at 35 upwards to 45 knots there in the vicinity of St. Matthew. And waves in the open water there of the eastern and central Bering around 15 to near 20 feet. And then for the Arctic coast, on Christmas Day, winds will be out of the east at 10 knots where the ice is in place, and dropping down through the lower Chukchi Sea and the Bering Strait, winds will be out of the east northeast 25 knots, though trying to turn southwesterly at 20 knots there as you get on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And then for Sunday, winds will continue out of the east along the Arctic coast 15 to 20 knots, and more northerly around 15 to 25 knots, turning northwesterly into Kotzebue Sound, and northerly through the Bering Strait at 25 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence. So on the weather map, we are watching low pressure frontal system working its way inland, has significant precipitation across the central interior, heavy snow and some freezing rain, so be careful if you have traveling plans here for the long holiday weekend. Have a Merry Christmas, and I'll be back Christmas Day.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal, pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.